Hello everyone, it's Rie. Welcome to my channel. And today we have a special guest, Hiroko さん。Hiroko さん、自己紹介お願いします。
はい、ありがとうございます。ひろこです。東海岸でリモートで AWS とかクラウドティングのことを教えたりとかして働いてるテクニカルライターとテクニカルインストラクターをしてます。
ありがとうございます。じゃあ、今日はいろいろひろこさんに質問していきたいと思います。I'm going to be asking you questions in English. All right. So the first question, what is your story of coming to the US?
So I came to the US when I was 7 years old because my dad is an expat and we came to the United States and we were supposed to stay for 5 years, but now something like 26 years that we've been
wow.
here. So initially we were supposed to be here for 5 years. So we were supposed to go back probably when I was in 6th grade or something. But I came here as 1st grade. So I went to school in Japan for about 3 months and then came here.
Oh, wow. Did you have a hard time like adjusting the culture?
Well, I think
Adjusting to
kids
the culture,
generally
yes.
have a bit of an easier time adjusting. But as you know, I went to school starting the next day and then went to school for a week and then couldn't get out of bed for the next month.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so I think like my brain kind of,パンクしてボーンって感じで I think because I've never been in a situation where I don't understand the language. I think, inherently as a 7-year-old, you probably don't really understand what it even means to be in another country, especially coming from such a, like a, everyone similar, speaks the same language, and then suddenly everyone looks different. Everyone's speaking this tongue, and you sit there trying to absorb it all, but there's no way for you to absorb it. So then I spent the next month not being able to go to school.
So did you just like stay at home and rested during that time, or?
Yeah, I was at home and I just couldn't get out of bed. Like I think my body and my brain kind of shut down. And then after a month, my homeroom teacher came to my house, and I think she talked to my mom and she talked to me. And after that, I was able to go back to school. But and then I was in ESOL for a while. So I think it was one of those things where the initial shock had to wear off before I could go back to school and really figure out what's going on.
So it seems like you had a difficult time, like, adjusting when you first came here. So my second question would be, how did you learn English and Japanese?
Yeah, so I learned Japanese in Japan for the first 7 years of my life. And then my mom taught both me and my sister for 8 years. So she homeschooled us every day for 8 years. Because as I said earlier, we were supposed to go back after 5 years, which meant that I had to be able to keep up with the kids in Japan, because I was supposed to go back to school after I went back to Japan. And English, I just learned when I got here. I didn't know the alphabet. I started from zero as a first grader. And was in ESOL, but I was also the first Japanese student in the school's 40-year history. So there wasn't very much of an infrastructure for ESOL. I think I had ESOL maybe 30 minutes a week. So other than that, I was in the general ed classroom and just sat there learning with the other kids.
Well, I just can't imagine how hard it was for like little 7 years old to like go through it. The question number 3 is, what did you struggle the most and what did you enjoy the most growing up in 2 countries?
So I think what I struggle with the most is the fact that I live in 2 very distinct cultures. So at home, there's the Japanese culture and, what's the norm in Japan and what my parents grew up with and what, even just the language itself is very different. And language, I think, is very loaded. People say that my personality is different with English and Japanese,
Oh,
but I
yeah.
think language is just a very, very loaded thing. And you don't speak the language just by speaking the words. There's just so much nuance and background to speaking a language and being like a user of that language. So while a lot of my American classmates had a very different culture, and then I was supposed to kind of become that too, but at the same time I needed to keep my, home culture too. And so kind of trying to navigate both and finding my place as someone who feels kind of like I don't belong either places, but both places are supposed to be my home, I think was probably the hardest, especially as a teenager when you already have a lot of problems.
Yeah.
As a teenager, and then you kind of have this like identity crisis because I'm like, well, I can't go back to Japan and be normal, but also here I will never be an American. I'm always an Asian American. And even if I got citizenship, and also I think it's not like a thing of just citizenship, with the backgrounds, you don't just, the way that society accepts you as one of their own is not really by the citizenship or the nationality. There's like a lot with language, there's just so much nuance to that. So I struggle with that a bit. I think my sister struggled a lot with that too. But at the same time, I think the fact that I have the both cultures and I guess the good parts of both, there's bad parts to both, but good parts to both. And kind of being able to be front and center, being able to absorb the good parts too was probably one of the best things. And now, I can kind of go back and forth between the two cultures and the two countries. And, there's a lot of good that you can get from both of them. So
Yeah.
that's been a really cool experience as an adult. I think while learning, when you're a child and your parents say, hey, you need to do all this extra work that other kids don't have to do, you're like, why?
Yeah.
But now that I'm an adult and I get the fruits of the labor, I'm very appreciative of what I have.
So you're like the bridge of two cultures. Yeah, and it's really impressive that you're like super fluent in Japanese and super, of course you're going to be fluent in English because you grew up here. But I think it's really impressive, and a lot of people, I think, struggle, especially those kids I met, those Asian American kids who grew up in the US. So I think it's really impressive. And then that leads to another question. The fourth question would be, when do you think is the best timing for a child to start learning another language?
So I think there's not a quote unquote best time,
Yeah.
but they do say developmentally for children to be able to speak without an accent that they should start probably before 12. It's because the way that I guess you hear and you speak, you hear differently. And for me, I came here when I was 7, so I speak mostly without an accent. But I also had the benefit of having a core language that was very well developed before I started learning English, which a lot of research is now saying that that's a good thing to have, is to have a core language that you can build upon so that you can kind of attach the meanings of the second language to the core language instead of learning both at the same time. And obviously, everyone's circumstances are different, and a lot of times you can't control that. But I think if a child is 7 or 10 or 11, maybe a lot of parents who want bilingual their children to grow up bilingual might be like, oh, maybe it's too late. But I think it's actually a good thing that they have a core language that they can build both on. And that's kind of what I did, is I had that core language, which was Japanese, and then I was able to kind of learn English on top of it, and both kept growing because I had both languages to lean on. And now obviously my English is a lot better than my Japanese, but it's because I grew up in a situation where there were no Japanese people around me. So the only people I spoke to in Japanese were my parents and my sister. But perhaps if I were in a more, community with a lot more Japanese people, my Japanese might have stayed, or I might have lost it, because it seems like when you're in a community of people that are around you that's like you,
Mm-hmm.
you start to say, well, why do I have to learn Japanese? Sato-kun doesn't have to go to Japanese school anymore. Why
Oh,
do
I
I have to go to
see.
Japanese school? And I thought that if you're in like New York,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of Japanese American kids. So I thought a lot of people would be bilingual. But my friends there told me that it's actually the opposite. There's too many.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
So there's too many people who are like you. So
Mm-hmm.
when someone stops going,
Mm.
everyone else starts going, well, why do I have to go? And they stop going. Whereas we had no people to look at to see what's normal and what's not normal. So there was no
Mm.
option to not study.
Uh-huh.
We were so isolated. So
Mm.
it might be that because we were so isolated and we didn't have a Japanese community, I ended up being able to maintain my Japanese.
Mm.
Because the difficulty is when you come here at 7, you can't just maintain your Japanese. You have to keep on growing it. Otherwise, I would just be
Yeah.
speaking like a 7-year-old.
Mm.
So I think that's the hardest part.
Mm.
And if I came here earlier, like my sister came here at 3, so then she really has to keep on growing her Japanese. And I think that's a lot harder when you're learning because you don't have I had the 4 extra years of Japanese fundamentals to lean on when I was learning English and Japanese, whereas my sister kind of had to start from scratch for both. And so I
Mm.
think having that core language is really beneficial.
Mm.
Or, it's not too late. Whenever you start, it's not
Yeah.
too late.
And it seems like your mother worked a lot. She did a lot for you guys. So I guess, the parents' role is pretty big, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, because
Yeah.
the kids are going to be saying, no, I don't want to do this. Why should I have to do this? And
Yeah.
it's a lot of work. Well, they say parenting is a thankless job, but I think when it comes to teaching your children a language
Mhm.
that they don't use ever, other than to watch
Yeah.
manga or
Mhm.
anime, you know, I liked reading books and I liked watching anime. So I had an
Mm.
intrinsic motivation to
Mm.
continue learning Japanese. And one of my friends who's Japanese American, she said she had no interest in Japanese, but her parents said, okay, we'll buy you video games if it's in Japanese. And so she learned Japanese, how to read Japanese and speak because she wanted to play video games. And I
Mm.
think just having hobbies or intrinsic motivations on why showing children that it's useful, like you can use it for
Yeah.
something, I think is really motivating. But without something that will motivate them to learn and use it, it's going to be really hard because language isn't useful for children unless there's a use for it. And
Yeah. And
that
as
could
a
be
child.
something like anime, that's
Mhm.
that's fine. If they're motivated by that, I think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, and as a children, it's really hard to like look up things like long term. Now
Mhm.
you're adult and you can see how it was, beneficial for you. But when you're just a child and it's just like growing up, it's really hard to see those like benefits and then, the fruit of the labor.
Mhm.
So yeah, the next question would be, so number 5, what advice would you like to give to your younger self?
So this is a huge loaded question because
Yes. But I like to
there's
ask to
so
everyone.
many things that you thought was reality when you're younger, but it's
Yeah.
not. And
Mhm.
I was actually talking about this with one of my best friends recently because there's the whole college admissions process here,
Mhm.
and there's apparently a documentary that some kids are creating about this one high school in San Francisco where all the kids are completely loaded down with schoolwork and
Mm.
extracurriculars and stuff so that
Mhm.
they can get into Harvard, Stanford. Like they're like, I have to get into an Ivy League, I have to get into this school, or else my life is over. And
Mm.
growing up, that's kind of how schools and teachers made you feel that getting good grades, getting into good college, getting a degree, and then getting that good job, it's like the SAT score, those things they made you feel like they were so important.
Mhm.
But in reality, like, I don't know what my grade was in high school. And does it matter? No. It's like, I don't know what my grade was in college or my SAT score. No one ever asks me that. And
Yeah, they don't.
no, they don't. And all these things that you thought were so important that were like life or death was life or death. And this amount of stress that you put on yourself to get these SAT scores or to get these good grades or to do this or that. And in the end, yeah, it mattered, but it didn't matter as much as adults made it seem. And I was working in corporate in New York for 5 or 6 years. And when I made the decision to quit corporate, I was thinking, oh, you can't just quit your job. You need your full-time job. And then I thought, why do I need a full-time job? Why can't I quit my corporate job and work freelance? And I realized the reason is what I was afraid people around me would say or think if I didn't have a corporate job. And, it's like, oh, she's a bum, or, oh, there's that. And in the end, I realized it's all just my perception of what people would think of me. But in reality, you're not that important. Like you're important, but people don't spend their lives thinking about, oh, look, Hiroko quit her job and went freelance.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
You think, because you are the center of your universe. So you are like, oh, what will people say? But people don't care. And I think that's really hard to think when you're in middle school and you're in high school, when you are the center of the universe and you feel like you have to accomplish all these things, and to do it, you have to put all this pressure on yourself. And none of it was true. And I wish, because I really struggled with depression when I was younger, when I was a preteen and teenager and stuff like that. And it was like all those problems were not that big of a problem. But because your brain is developing, you tend to like think that way. But I wish more adults could help with trying to put it in context. You said earlier that kids don't see the long-term benefits a lot of times.
Yeah.
And because we didn't know, because we're kids. So I think as adults, I like to speak about my experiences and how I'm living a life that's different from what society told me that I should be doing, because to tell people, hey, it's okay to not go do the thing that people or your parents want you to do in your, like the railroad track, and go down the railroad track. It's fine. You're going to be fine, and I would really like to be able to tell myself when I was like 11, 14, 16, 18, when I was just so stressed out. And then even in my 20s, when I was so stressed out trying to figure out how to get a job or, what to do next with my career. And it kind of seemed like everything seemed like it's the end of the world, but it really isn't. And yeah, it's like, take it easy. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's okay. As long as you're alive, it's going to be okay.
Yeah, and find your own North Star rather than looking at the North Star like society sets, everyone else, it's like society tells you to chase after. Because it's not gonna really like lead you to your own happiness. Because if it's not aligned with who you are. So yeah, I think it's a great advice.
Yeah, one of those things was that I had to learn is no one's going to care as much about your future and your well-being as you will. Like,
yeah, that
you're
is
the
so
only
true.
person that has to deal with you for the rest of your life. So you might as well be your best lover. Like, you should be that person that takes care of you the best, because inherently you're stuck with yourself for the rest of your life. So
that is so true.
you want yourself to be the best you can be, right? Because you're stuck. You can't leave. It's not like a bad partner. You can't leave. Even if you hate it and you hate yourself, you can't leave. So you might as well, do things to make you more palatable to yourself. Yeah,
that is so true. I think it's a wonderful, answers. Yeah, wonderful things that you mentioned. And then, I think it can inspire a lot of people. You learned English when you were like 7, but I started learning English when I was like 18. So you can start learning any language anytime, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but it was really like great to hear your experience, and thank you so much for sharing. We are planning on doing like some like collaboration, right? So yeah, and then if we decide to do something together, we are going to post on social media and stuff. So please follow us. Hiroko-san is on Twitter a lot. We are both on ClubHouse. Yeah, so we will see you guys soon. Thank you so much, Hiroko-san.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
レコードできたかな？
できてるできてる。
OK。じゃあ、いきます。あ、ストップレコーディングどこや？あ、ここか。